Thank you all for being here. Before our meeting begins, we will have an invocation offered by Mr. Waddington, followed by the Pledge of Allegiance.
God our Father, as we gather for this meeting this evening, give us the guidance and wisdom to make the proper decisions. Amen.
Amen.
Allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Roll, please.
Ms. Twine? Here. Mr. Brady?
Here.
Mr. Poole?
Here.
Mr. Murray?
Here.
Mr. Lockhart?
Here.
Ms. Lloyd? Here. Mr. Waddington?
Commissioners, you have before you the minutes of our last meeting, November 27, 2017. What is your pleasure?
Mr. Chairman,
Mr. Waddington.
I move that we accept the minutes of the November 27th meeting and special reading.
Second.
Been a motion, second discussion. Without objection, the motion will be approved. And hearing no objection, the motion is approved. And as always, now we turn to audience participation. Anyone wishing to comment on any of the regular agenda items, please step to the microphone, give us your name and address, share with us your thoughts.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, City Commissioners, staff. Item number 2, which is the Shoreline Drive reconstruction project. It's a great project, good project. We've discussed it in our Bayfront Quarter Committee meetings. One of the items that did come up, though, during the Bayfront Quarter Committee meetings is the fact that, I'll take you back through a little bit of history. 2005, with the Chesapeake Lofts project and the Marina District, the Paper District Marina project, there were plans in 2005 to do Shoreline Drive west of the Chesapeake Lofts. That's kind of gotten put to the wayside, and it would have been nice if this project that we're going to be talking about today would have included the entire length of Shoreline Drive. I want you to keep that in the front of your minds as we proceed with this portion of Shoreline Drive, that once this is done, then we need to finish up what we were promised to begin with. As a matter of fact, back in 2005, the project was actually staked out. The reason why it was not finished at that time, I don't know if any of you remember Gary Packin. He was working on that part of the project, and he said at that time that it was not going to be, the Shoreline Drive west of the Chesapeake was not going to be done at that time because of the fact of heavy construction with the Paper District Marina. So moving forward, let's keep that in the front of our minds, that we need to have a complete project. Item number 3, which is the Jackson Street Pier contract. Just one question to begin with is, after we proceed with this contract this evening, will the final design plans come before the City Commission for approval for design build? The only comment I will have on this as a representative of the Friends of the Jackson Street Pier is that we still are holding out hope as a group that 1/3 of the proposed green space is reduced, that we have an additional 26 parking places, short-term parking places at the end of the pier to replace that 1/3 of the green space that's reduced. And also, it all depends upon what day you talk to somebody, whether or not there's an event stage planned or not. We see it as an event stage. We would think that we would need to have just a green space. We don't need to have another event stage. You've all heard this before. We've got one to the west on the other side of the Chesapeake. There may be plans for an events complex on some portion of this property. So is there really a need for a 40 by 40 foot stage on the Jackson Street Pier? And we also hold out hope that there be some accommodations to keep the existing food vendors on the pier indefinitely, instead of saying, okay, well, we'll find you a spot somewhere else downtown. They like where they're at. I've personally talked to both vendors. They like where they're at. They're doing good on their business. So we should not interrupt a viable business that's been there for a few years. What we're looking for as a group is a plan that the residents, not off the pier businesses, not tourists, but the people that actually live here, work here, and play here every day, that we can appreciate and enjoy. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Schwager. Anyone else present?
Catherine Carter, 5309 Columbus Avenue. Originally, the pier was called an underutilized, weedy, dirty, ugly, cracked blacktop parking lot. Now it's being described as a low to moderate area of slum and blight. This has become interesting on how, if it doesn't work the way you planned it, change the wording, move the money, and change its designation to change its use, throw it against the wall and see what sticks. If that doesn't work, make up something else. The newspaper had printed, money from the city's everyday operating budget, backed by taxpayers, will not provide 1 cent toward this effort. And I think the everyday operating budget included the revolving fund loan. Rather, property tax money in a special account, which you already have created, subsidized only by Chesapeake Loft residents, would fund any and all costs. There is enough money in the account today to cover project expenses. So when this was written at the beginning of the year, when we started all this, you had the money. I don't understand why you need another $400,000 to continue this. I understand you have to use that money, but to use it for the pet project seems to let 24,000 other people down that live in this city. I also called some people in Canton that I know, and the people that I talked to said that no one they know likes the reverse diagonal parking, but they deal with it because that's what they got stuck with. That was their comments. And there's a lot of scratch doors and fenders and things like that because people aren't good at backing up. So that was just the comments that I got from Canton. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Carter. Anyone else present wishing to address or comment on any of the regular agenda items? Then, we are delighted and honored to have with us members of the Masonic Lodge number 50. Dennis Claxton, I do not know you, sir, but if you would step up to the microphone. I understand you have a presentation that you would like to make. Oh, please. Yes.
I brought a couple guys with me.
I noticed.
I'd like to address everybody here. Just a brief history, what we're here for. This is our 200th year, and it's the city of Sandusky's 200th year. So we're pretty excited about that. Freemasonry actually started 300 years ago in London, as we know it today. It came to the United States, it came to Ohio. 6 lodges formed the Grand Lodge of Ohio. Of those 6, one worshipful master was named James Kilbourne. His son, Hector Kilbourne, was a surveyor for Sandusky, and he laid out the city streets in the square and compasses formed of the Masons. He was our first master in 1818. So there's a lot of Masonic history, a lot of tradition in this town. And it's great to be celebrating 200 years with the commission, with the city of Sandusky and the Masonic Lodge. As a result, November 27th, we had our installation. And for our installation, we presented a plat map to the city. And Trevor Hayberger was very nice enough to pick it up for us. This is the original layout, square and compasses. It's the only city in the world that's laid out in a form of the square and compasses, Masonic symbol.
Let's make sure the folks at home can see that. Mr. Claxton, the camera's right up over there.
So it's the only city in the world known to be laying out in a Masonic tradition. So with that, we think it's a great honor to present it to the city, and hope you enjoy it for your 200th year. And we were very happy to receive a proclamation from the city stating our 200 years and some of our history that went with that. So with that, thank you very much.
Well, thank you, and thank you for all that you and your lodge contribute to the community, starting way back when, 200 years ago.
Right.
And congratulations on your own celebration and anniversary. We are delighted to be celebrating at the same time with you. I'm very sorry I could not present the proclamation personally, but we were hunkered down here doing the city's business. And
That's understandable.
That's how it turned out that night. So.
Also, there is an original of this in the library, downstairs of the library, which is very difficult to get to see. They have very restricted, they don't like the light on it.
Oh, sure.
But the original plat map is in the library.
Well, I'm happy to accept on behalf of the city. Again, Mr. Claxton, thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you,
Gentlemen, thank you for being here. Delighted to have you. Hey, Mark, how are you? Good to see you. Thank you, sir. Thank you. How are you?
I was hiding there.
I didn't see it. Thank you. Thank you very much, sir.
Thank you very much.
Thanks, Dennis. Absolutely.
And next, on a return engagement, we have Mr. Alex Pesta here to present regarding the Shoreline Drive and engineering and design. And Bonnie Tuine, I'm sorry, Bonnie, I'm going to mispronounce your last name. I think I probably did. But it'll be the Alex and Bonnie show here.
No, actually, it's on the desktop. Right?
Navy blue, close enough.
It's almost Masonic dress.
How's it? Okay. Mr. Pesta, the floor is yours.
Good evening. Thank you, everyone, for inviting us back. It's always nice to be in Sandusky. With me, as Dennis mentioned, is Bonnie Tuine from Osborne Engineering that has certainly helped us pull together a collective package that considers the aesthetic side, which is the side that I tend to gravitate more towards, and the operational and engineering, kind of the technical aspects that Bonnie and her team have literally dug into. With that, I'm going to provide an overview of Shoreline Drive, the process that has led us here, the full scope of the work as far as kind of the beginning point and any point of the project, and then a lot of the parts and pieces that can make up, in our estimation, a new waterfront promenade that can redefine the north shore of the core downtown. So our project that the city has scoped us to look at has been focused on basically between Lawrence and with the intersection on Water Street on the east. So it is the full length of Shoreline Drive. It equates to approximately 3/4 of a mile. And you can see, it's a little difficult, so I apologize. You can see the dark blue line is the existing Bayfront connector trail. And you can see that there are some gaps. We do believe that this project can help fill those gaps. We do believe that with the enhancements, with the improvements, that the existing connector trail can be elevated to match a lot of the other work that you guys are accomplishing here in Sandusky. So with that, we don't start a project until we literally have boots on the ground. And one of the many things that we've been tasked with above and beyond increasing, enhancing, you're going to hear me say that a lot because I do think that value can be created through those types of initiatives, is also a conditions assessment of what you have, right? And so I think everybody in this room knows this well. If you don't, I'm going to remind you kind of what you have from an inventory standpoint. The drive aisle or the street has various kind of stages of disrepair. The asphalt is cracked. There's been some places where it's been repaired. The condition kind of ranges moving from west to east. So in the top left, it's in pretty rough shape. As you move through the core of the district, so the Beckland building on the left, Shade Mylander Plaza is in close proximity there. The condition is a little bit better. And then as you extend to the to the west, the condition of the pavement kind of literally falls apart until there was a new chip seal. I'm assuming that, Aaron, there was a chip seal kind of topping that was put on the far western side of the project. What I can tell you and what Bonnie's team has uncovered through the surveys and knowing that there are underground railroad tracks still in place under Shoreline Drive, that coupled with the grading or the way that the cross slope has to work with the street, you're looking at a complete reconstruction of Shoreline Drive. There is not a scenario where you can, what's called mill and fill, you grind off the top 3 to 4 inches and then put asphalt back. Literally speaking, that you would hit railroad track that's there. So once that can of worms gets opened, now we're looking at a full reconstruction, and that's where kind of looking at this through a different lens of what can we put back that not only replaces what's there, but increases operations and certainly makes it a much better experience for everyone that uses. So that's from the vehicular standpoint. When you walk the study area, you are also confronted with a few things. some things are very pleasant, the views to the waterfront. I didn't focus on those because I think these are the problems, these are the issues that can be solved with the design and layout that is proposed. So on the left, you can see the sidewalk that is on the south side. It kind of ebbs and flows, but on average, it's between 5.5 and 6 feet before you hit encroachments. Encroachments could be a curb, encroachments could be a dumpster, porches, stairs, electrical transformers, you name it, it's in that zone. And what this plan aims to do is literally clean up that space. And you're going to see when we get into some cross-section studies, we refer to that as a buffer zone. We know we have to make place for that, for those pieces of infrastructure and utility. We can't be so cavalier to say that it's not there. We must work that into the design. Excuse me. And then on the top right, the sidewalk condition really varies as you move along the corridor as well. Sometimes there's a nice 6-foot sidewalk, sometimes it expands upwards of 8 feet, and then frankly, there's some places where there is no sidewalk at all. The streetscape project will formalize, the streetscape will be well defined, and then we will enhance. The bottom right-hand photograph shows a young woman picking up her perch sandwiches, going across the street. You can see what is currently noted as the Bayfront connector. It's a 10.5-foot wide concrete sidewalk that has additional width in some places where there isn't that tree lawn or the landscaping that's on the right-hand side of that photograph. We think that that corridor, that connector can be enhanced. We think that as a waterfront experience, it ought to be. That we've talked about quite a bit about how much of an asset the waterfront is and the proximity to the waterfront that you can get with this experience. That should be something, in our opinion, that is identifiable and immediately brands the city of Sandusky as a waterfront community. Frankly speaking, right now, it's a wide concrete sidewalk. We can do better, and I think that we can help you guys get there. The other thing that this does, the project does, and when I say formalize the road, look how wide that roadway feels that person is crossing the street. And we're going to get into kind of a comparative analysis here. So there's been questions about the stakeholder committees and the community process that we've engaged, that we've conducted. What I can tell you is that the community meetings have been very well attended. We've conducted several open houses, both for Shoreline Drive and Jackson Street Pier. And the top two kind of votes, or the top two things that came to light with Shoreline Drive, is that two things needed to happen. The streets need to be repaved, and we need to improve walkability and bikeability. I think that speaks to the width of the sidewalk in some cases on the south side, the conditions on the north, and quite frankly, the paving that's of the roadway as you move through the district. So with that as our charge, we worked with Bonnie, we worked with others to develop 3 options that we vetted with the community. It's a little difficult to read, but what I can tell you is that the bottom right-hand option is the one that is heavily favored. You can see with the dots that are on that board. And what that option entailed was a protected multi-purpose trail on the north side, which would be an extension of the Bayfront connector. And on the south side, integrated parking that kind of moves back and forth between angled back-in parking and parallel parking. I'm going to show you where there's 2 different configurations and why we're recommending a blend of the 2 parking configurations rather than one consistently from one end to the corridor to the other. Without going into all of the details, the parking count is very similar. The net parking count is very similar to what you have today. So we've been able to maintain the parking spaces within 10 spaces. There's 186 now. In existing conditions, the proposed puts back 180. We've been able to achieve that, again, to integrate the multi-purpose trail, and the angled parking helps us meet those counts. So when we start looking at other places, we'd like to know what works before we propose it. And angled back-in parking is something that is supported heavily by communities. It is prevalent in Northeast Ohio. It is not something that is only saved for the East and the West Coast. Canton, Ohio, University Heights, Akron, they all employ this type of parking arrangement. Okay, and so here's what it does. It does require you to back into a parking space, but it is actually eliminates, if you think of how you parallel park, there's 3 steps to parallel parking, right? You pull up, you put it in reverse, you turn, and then you turn the other way and you back in. This function eliminates that last movement. So you back in on that angle, there you are, you're parked. When it's time to go, You as a driver are now looking over your left-hand shoulder to where there could be oncoming traffic instead of back over the top of your right-hand shoulder where it is potentially a very dangerous situation. This also allows us to shrink the depth of the parking space so it doesn't have to be as deep. And if you've heard me talk before, I would much rather put that space into the public realm in a sidewalk, in a plaza, in a trail. So what the angle parking affords us is a simplified parking movement and also additional real estate that we can pick up that can be reallocated. Also, we've looked at where trails have brought value to other places. The gold standard today, and I'm sure that our friends from EDG could echo this, is the Indianapolis Cultural Trail, obviously in Indianapolis, Indiana. It has seen a tremendous amount of continued investment that has been spurred by the city and a 501c3 or nonprofit putting in the trail. What I can tell you is that you get about $14 for every dollar in Indianapolis that they put into the trail system. So it is an economic driver, it is an economic engine. As far as an aesthetic, we can look at and study different ways to separate pedestrians and cyclists or folks that want to sit and look at the water to people that are commuting. There's very creative ways that Bonnie and us, we will come back through the next stage of design. So we went through that process with the public. And then we came to Planning Commission last month. We got support for the project, but with some very good guidance and things to look at. One was the configuration that we shared with Planning Commission had a concrete median that was curbed. Talking with Aaron and his team, he said that's going to last about 2 years with our snow plows, get rid of it. And then we talked about also extending the north sidewalk to the south, putting more space into that northern side, where we do anticipate people to be walking adjacent to the water. So what we did is we rebalanced the street based on what we've heard, and then the cross-section I'll go through in a second. Again, this is the last diagram I'm going to show you related to the street, I promise. When I said that the roadway is undefined or ill-defined, this is what I mean. Okay, so everything in red that is on the screen is where your roadway is right now. That's not just pavement. What that diagram shows is so if there is a parking space that is striped, this does not count that pavement. This is literally roadway width, and you can see as it comes in and out along the right-of-way, it can create mass confusion. It creates oversized lanes. People drive too quickly in those lanes. We know that that occurs. And quite frankly, that space can be better utilized. When we look at how a formalized 23-foot wide roadway fits into that space, what I can tell you is that everything that you still see in red, we can put to a better use. It can be a sidewalk, it can be a bicycle lane, it can be a multi-purpose trail. You see that there's the potential that's there, and those feet and inches really count in a downtown and an urban environment like this. So I'm going to show you how we do that. So the three sections that you see on the screen, the top is the existing. On the left-hand side is the north, so the waterfront. You can see that there's two configurations that are included in the recommendation. One is with angled parking, the other was with parallel parking. I'm going to start on the north and work our way south. So in the existing, there's an 8-foot buffer. I'm going to show you a photograph in a second. There's an 8-foot buffer. Sometimes that's landscaped, sometimes that's paving. And then the Bayfront connector trail is 10.5 feet. So that line is pretty consistent. If we go back to the diagram that I just shared, that line is pretty consistent throughout the project. As you come across the street, where this particular section is cut, it's almost 28 feet. What I can tell you is that that range is between 22 and 51 feet in width. That needs to be tightened up where possible. It needs to be formalized everywhere through the corridor. And then again, where this section is shown is 16.5 feet that is designated as parking. Moving to the south, 6.5 feet, 6.4, where there's a sidewalk, and then 10, almost 11 feet that is that buffer zone. So remember the photographs that I showed where the electrical transformers and the dumpsters and all of those things, that occurs in that tan area that's on the south side of the street. Let me clarify what that 27.7 and 16.8 is, because I told you that we're going to actually make the parking stalls a little bit shallower. If you look at this, it looks like it's the other way around. What's happening in this case is that 4.5 feet of roadway is actually being used as parking. So when we drop down to the section that's in the middle, you can see that 23-foot wide roadway and adjacent parking stall is actually a little bit narrower than what is the existing condition. And you can see we've shifted to the south We've included 4.5 feet, the difference between 10.5 and 15th on the north. And that dimension stays consistent all the way through the project. We thought that it was very important to not only have a consistent roadway, but a consistent bayfront connector on the north side of the street. Where the variables occur are 19 feet for back-in angled parking in the middle, and where it makes sense, which we're recommending in the core of the district, that angled parking converting to parallel parking and you increasing the sidewalk on those few blocks. And what you can see there is that you've added a significant amount of sidewalk space, and that roadway actually gets quite a bit narrower. I mentioned ways that we can delineate the path on the north. It can be through landscaping, pavement markings, bollards, signage. Knowing that there are existing driveway and curb cuts, we have to be careful, and we're going to work with everybody to make sure that as cyclists and pedestrians are approaching those approaches, so on the right-hand slide, there's ways that they see it. One of the other things that we think is very important to add vitality and potentially activity, and you can see kind of in the middle of the bottom of the screen, but in some cases those bollards would be replaced by utility hookups that could support a festival or places for vendors to plug in that would provide electricity and or potentially water. So that kind of plug and play proposition we know has worked in other places. If I start all the way on the left, as I mentioned, and move our way to the east, you can see the roadway is shown in that black dashed line. It goes everywhere right now. We've simplified that. The yellow designates parking. The blue is sidewalk. The teal color on the north is the connector. And that orange color is really what we refer to as the buffer. So in some places it's landscaping primarily on the north side of the street, and then that's where some of those utilities and other building services exist on the south side of the street. So in this particular case, we're essentially cleaning up what's there. There isn't a huge impact as far as a change because of the existing uses that are there, especially as the roadway turns south towards Lawrence. One of the things that we've discovered and we've been told is that dumpsters just kind of show up everywhere and anywhere along Shoreline Drive. So our charge is to consolidate, put those into a surround or a structure so that is not something that is absolutely prevalent when you're driving or walking on the street. We've come up with a few options. Those will be further vetted through the next series of design iterations, but you can see it's the idea of a very simple masonry enclosure all the way to something that has a roof over top of it, being very careful not to block views of the south buildings, but a roof over it to help kind of shield that view looking out. The reason why I bring that up now is everywhere on the plan you see a red rectangle. That's where those dumpsters are proposed to go and be consolidated. So what we've done is we've worked to put them centrally located. We've put them adjacent to existing uses today, which they may or may not change as things move forward, but existing uses today that would be very unlikely to have outdoor dining, an office, a salon, those types of things, places that you wouldn't want to put people eating outdoors next to where trash is thrown away. All right, so again, these can move around through the design process. You can see here on the north side, the Bayfront connector, the trail in teal. Again, you can see it's consistent as we move to the south. So Jackson Street moving into downtown, you can see here's where we're proposing a change from the angled parking on the west or the left-hand side of Jackson to parallel parking. And you can see the difference in that blue area, that sidewalk space that can be picked up as we move core to the district. It still provides on-street parking. It's my opinion that it also provides a nice buffer between moving traffic and where people are going to be walking, sitting, or hanging out. And then you can see where we also think that we can get those vendor hookups, whether they're on the north or south, till be determined. And it's a function of where we think that those activities are there. But I know working with Bonnie, the sooner we introduce that into the equation, the better off we are. I.e., once the street is torn apart, that's the time to introduce those types of amenities. As we move further to the east, Shade Mylander as a landmark is there on the left. You can see that this is the final block where we're proposing that parallel parking. So there's 2 blocks where there's parallel parking. The balance would be the angled parking. This is to provide the additional flexibility in the core of the district, the vitality that we know exists in downtown. And then as we move further to the east, we transition back to the angled parking to get those parking counts up to support the businesses that are there. And then one of the big changes that we are proposing, the condominiums that are on the south side of Shoreline Drive adjacent to where it ties into Water Street. When in our stakeholder meeting with the residents there, they said, you know what, it feels pretty dangerous when I drive in and out of my driveways because of the proximity to what I'll call the intersection, although it's a big sweeping turn right now. What we're proposing is actually, this is a spot where, again, you can see the black dashed line. This is a spot where you have almost 50 feet of pavement. When we right-size that street and we formalize that street, that allows us to provide a separate lane that people coming home or leaving can pull into. They're not pulling out into traffic. It's buffered from the street, and it really provides increased sight lines and protection on the eastern side of the project. So you don't have people that are turning onto Shoreline Drive, accelerating around that left-hand corner, and then all of a sudden finding someone that's pulling out of their driveway. We've tightened up that radius as much as we can to try to slow down traffic, and that has afforded the extra feet and inches in order to make this happen. The other proposal that we're strongly recommending, which is consistent with the recently completed East Bay Master Plan, is the elimination of the driveway into Shoreline Park here. That provides a continuous, which is about here on the plan, which provides a contiguous, protected, off-street connector trail that can connect down onto Shoreline and then make its way west through the project. I've mentioned the south sidewalk. This is how it relates to the diagram that we showed you. You can see the parking, the angled head-in parking, which really makes that 6.5 feet, 6.4 feel even narrower because the front bumpers are hanging over. With back end, that doesn't happen as much, and you can always put in wheel chocks to make sure that that space doesn't get encroached too much, and then you can see that almost 11-foot space of what happens on the south side. What we think is possible with the expansion of the south side is two case studies that really borrow two different sidewalk widths. So Hyde Park Square in Cincinnati is a national example of kind of that space, those places. It's a pretty narrow sidewalk as far as an urban setting is considered, 15 feet, but you can see what that brings from a level of flexibility. There's outdoor dining. There's people that can now comfortably walk on that side of the street. If I go back, I'm thankfully out of the years of pushing a stroller, but when we would go for walks at home and we would come to a streetscape or we would come to a place where there's a utility pole or there is a newspaper box and it gets narrowed down, it becomes a single file line and it gets pretty crowded. This 15 feet, you can see that this is a much more comfortable experience. Where that space widens up, where the parallel parking is, you can see that there is the potential, as they do in Washington, D.C., or as done in Washington, D.C., to provide connections to the businesses that could provide sidewalk activities, whether it's outdoor dining. They could perhaps have an outdoor kind of point of sale where there could be merchandise that's there. But any way to activate that space, we think with that flexibility, that's possible. So I'll leave you with kind of our last image, our last diagram. You can see the path, the trail on the northern side, so on the left-hand side of the slide. We do think that it is incredibly important to buffer that or protect the vehicular traffic with bollards, whether they have a rope or a chain. We were really kind of pushing a nautical theme that's here, and we would certainly encourage that would be consistent throughout the entire corridor. In this particular case, there's parallel parking on the south side or on the right-hand side, but that could be the angled back end. And you can see where we're going to integrate landscaping into key locations that takes into consideration some of the sloping issues that we need to rectify where those driveways are. So when we start to overlay what you get when you rebuild it, in my opinion, the right way, you get an expanded and delineated sidewalk and Bayfront connector on the north-hand side, waterfront amenities, seating, landscaping, maybe some trees. We have to be very careful with where they go. Vendor hookups, lighting, street furniture, all of those things become possible when that northern piece gets formalized and very identifiable. The roadway, this doesn't work without narrowing the roadway and bringing some order to the roadway. That's where all of these feet and inches that we've talked about come from. We're not taking sidewalk out of one side and giving it to the other. It's literally all coming from that very wide roadway that you have today. Identifiable on-street parking right now. There's some spaces that are striped and there's some places that are free-for-all, notably east of Columbus, where it literally and figuratively falls apart from a parking standpoint. And then that also provides us the ability to enhance that south sidewalk, again, providing for flexibility and activities that could happen. So with that, I know that that was a lot to go through very quickly. It has been a very nice process that we've had with the stakeholders. We've learned a lot. I think that with Bonnie's, with her due diligence, understanding the technical aspects of this really pushed us into the situation working with Aaron that it was a complete reconstruct. That's really what the city is looking at. And again, I'm going to leave you with, if you're going to put it back or reconstruct it, let's put it in a way that adds value and actually enhances what you have there. So with that, thank you very much. I'm sure that there are some questions that Bonnie and I would be happy to do our best to answer.
Thank you, Mr. Besta. Commissioners, questions or comments?
Mr. Chairman,
Mr. Brady.
wonder, every picture that I saw continued to show utilities above ground. I presume it's a benefit to cost ratio that just couldn't be overcome or cannot be overcome without us winning the lottery several times?
I'm going to turn it over to Bonnie because I'll turn it over to Bonnie. I get in trouble when I start to speak like an engineer.
So, I don't know, Alex, can you go back to one of the existing pictures?
Try, yes.
So if you remember the existing condition out there, you have utility lines that are on the very top of the pole, and then you have some midway through. We were asked to look at the possibility of burying the utilities. What we found out after talking and trying to get as much information as we could from the existing utilities, that it is possible to physically relocate some of the utilities. That's the ones that are halfway, that are located halfway up the pole. You can, yes, thank you. You can relocate those. However, the lines that are at the very top of the utility poles are transmission lines. And it is not possible to, without a huge expense and really without relocating them around the city to another location overhead, you cannot relocate those underground. So what we can do is take the majority of those lines and bury those underground, but not all of them. So if you look in the renderings, you can see that the poles are still there, but it doesn't have all the lines on the poles.
Additional questions or comments?
Mr. Chairman,
Cool.
on the, what do we gain, what's the additional expense moving part of the lines compared to leaving them where they are? It's like, why would we do that if you're gonna have lines that are gonna be there? Are you recommending, or that's just what you've been told to do?
It's an option to look at, and, I think from a visual perspective, if you can get those lines further up, they're away from the line of sight. So it's something, we haven't decided one way or the other what we're doing. It's just an option to make sure that we either can or can't do it.
Chairman,
Cool.
at 5'6", I didn't realize that they were up there. In terms of line of sight. I do have a question about the buffering down by Shoreline Park for those private residences. What are you buffering with? I could have swore we stopped doing buffering because we couldn't plow snow. What are you doing differently there?
We can do it with a curb, which I think we work out with Aaron that I'm surmising that you say that that's not going to last. So we could integrate above ground like planters that are maybe precast concrete so that there's some mass behind them. If they were to get struck, they're very easily to be replaced. And it's not something that a snow plow is likely to hit because you have the vertical exposure rather than a 6-inch curb.
Okay, I'm more concerned with how you're going to remove snow between the two areas. And I'm trying to decide if I think it's even a good idea. You said they have 50 feet behind the garages to what's going to be the new pavement. The car's only 20 feet long. I'm trying to figure out if we're coming where the danger comes in here with this new design. So if you'd show it again and talk about it, maybe it'll make more sense.
Could, but is there a reason? It blacked out, yeah. I'm going to go back to that plan. So when I said 50 feet, That is the existing width of pavement today. So
Okay,
the
all the
road
way
right now
across.
is 50 feet.
Okay,
The space behind the condo, so where that line is with the number 9 through that section cut, that shows there's area for a visitor parking space behind because those garages are actually recessed into those condo units.
correct.
So that can exist, and then a drive aisle area for people to back out into that space to do that. So on the northern side of that, and you can see kind of where that buffer is proposed here, that's where that consistent roadway would wrap around and connect down to Water Street. I would guess, from a snow standpoint, that last garage is approximately here. You can see we've notched out this area here, so if the condos are clearing snow, it could be pushed in this direction and stockpiled here. From a Shoreline Drive perspective, it could be pushed up to the north side, because again, we're gonna have bollards that are there that are gonna allow that snow to be kind of stockpiled off of the roadway.
Mr. Chairman, then the south of this separated area, to the south of is all owned by the condos? It's condo?
No.
You said they're gonna remove the snow.
No. So it's that space right now is in the public right of way.
Okay, so we're removing the snow. Yes or no?
Yeah, the conversations we had with them is that they would take on the removal of the snow in that area. Through the chair.
What I would say is, if you're familiar with where the Red Cross building is, it was over on Central Ave. They had a dedicated parking just specifically for them. It wasn't public parking. So it was their responsibility to remove the snow because it was set up just for them. And
Okay.
one other thing I would say is that, I don't know if Bonnie's aware of it yet, but she's gonna be dealing with our street department, our sewer department, our water department, every other department, public services throughout the design process. So those discussions will be had throughout the design of exactly how snow is gonna be cleared, and brainstorming on pretty much anything and everything throughout this entire roadway to ensure that, we get the best design and setup.
Mr. Webster, you're looking for a chance to address something. Or
Through
was it addressed?
the commission president to Commissioner Poe, is actually his first question about the utility lines. I felt the same way at first, but then I went and walked it, and I think you'll find, and again, we don't know budget-wise whether we'd be able to remove the lower lines or not, but there are about 3 additional lines of utilities and an additional set of smaller poles that only serve those. And I was actually surprised by the impact that I think it would make visually if those 3 lower lines were gone, as well as the additional poles. So the only thing I would say is that'll be addressed in this next phase, but I would encourage everyone who has questions to actually walk or drive Shoreline Drive and look at I didn't know that they were there either until I looked, and those 3 lines in particular and those additional poles, the removal of them, I felt would go a long way towards clearing up the visual obstructions from the corridor. And I would just encourage you or anybody else to take a look and obviously make up your own minds, but that'll be addressed in the next phase of the design process.
Commissioners, additional questions or comments?
Mr. Chairman.
Mr. Brady?
On that same issue, I don't think most of us are terribly offended by the lines. But what you're looking at, if you bring up one of the real pictures, you'll see that there are 7 what are called 3-phase utility transformer banks. So in each of those, there are 3 very large transformers attached to that pole. That's what is offensive looking. And that really breaks up sight lines for everyone going down through there. What I'm talking about is those transformer cans next to the Beckling building, and then go another 100 yards and there's 3 more. Go another 100 yards and there's 3 more. If we can reduce the secondary electric lines, the transmission lines will be fine, but if we can reduce the secondary electric lines, that reduces an enormous amount of really unsightly clutter. And I get it that it's expensive, not impossible to remove the transmission lines, but I sure hope we have the money to get the secondary lines out of the way. That'll take care of the transformers too.
Additional questions or comments?
Mr. Chairman, I have another question.
Mr. Poole?
Dealing with the bollards and your nautical theme, you want to bring that up? Okay, I presume that runs from there all the way to Shoreline Drive, with the exception of driveways?
Yes.
Okay,
Yes.
just recognize now, bicycles, pedestrians, et cetera, are trapped. They don't have any access out of there. I'm not sure that those lines in, if the separation separates the cars from pedestrians. You don't need chains in between, so just give that some consideration. Likewise, if we're riding a bicycle down there, you've already mixed bicycles with pedestrians, which I'm not supportive of. There's nowhere to go to the left. And I'm not sure we gain a thing in terms of having little ropes or chains or whatever running the length of that. It may look cute, but it day in and day out, the utilization of that space is gonna be, it becomes dangerous. Now I'm dodging people and flipping my bike over top of the chains. And I've already stated that I think that the separation should be between the bicyclists and the pedestrians. But as long as if you're gonna project that there's gonna be a minimum amount of pedestrian traffic, then mixing bicycles with pedestrians may very well work. I mean, there's any number of ways to do it, but I have concerns about it if you actually think you're gonna put a lot of people down there walking. Additionally, I have one last question, dealing with the location of electricity for carts, food carts.
Yes.
Talked about that. It seems to me that it needs to go on the north side, only because of the conflict between the businesses and the food carts. Likewise, it just keeps the separation. If people are sitting, it's easier to deal with if you've got space over there. I'm not sure that with the design of these sidewalk, you've actually got space to do much, whether you increase the size of the sidewalk on the north or not. But depending on how many food carts or whatever it is you're gonna put on the south side, you just have to consider that issue.
Sure.
I saw hot dogs in front of Hot Dog Tony's. Because they're different clientele. That's the other thing too. The people walking by versus those who wanna sit and dine. I'm not sure we're not ahead separating them and putting them across the street. Thank you.
Additional questions or comments? If not, then thank you both.
Thank you.
And now we turn to Michelle Johnson and Jeff Kerr, who are here to talk to us about a very exciting new project called The Landing. It's been in the newspaper, but I don't think we've discussed it much at the commission meetings today.
Good evening, my name is Michelle Johnson, and today is Jeff Kerr. Today's the first day I've had a voice in a week, so if I kick out, he'll come up. Thank you so much for having us today. We're here to talk about Landing Park, which is a portion of the Sandusky Bay pathway, but specifically dealing with, in this case, it was decided to separate it out because we have major stakeholders, not only with the city, but Cedar Fair, who owns most of the property involved here, as well as Erie Metro Parks, who owns the other majority of the property involved here. So this was a fantastic public-private partnership that we saw move forward basically over the past year, having everyone work together, which I think historically is not something that has been done well, and it was a fantastic process. So thank you for everybody who was involved with that. So we had a fairly long and extensive process. We had a lot of site visits. I kind of joked at the last meeting, we were probably out there 10, 15 times. My boss, Jeff, sitting up there, has a drone and really likes using it. So we have a lot of really cool imagery. A lot of it we actually sent to the Planning Commission and planning staff as well, just to kind of put as part of the inventory. But the drone images that you're seeing, and the reason I bring it up half jokingly, is that we had historic water levels. So this is something, as you see the imagery, Sandusky Bay and the East Bay and the Back Bay look very different right now, even through, as we get into December, and especially this summer. Every time we came back for another meeting, every time we had a conference call, those water levels were going up instead of down. So we took out all the existing conditions. So if you have any questions about any of the data, any of the water levels, any of the wetlands, because there's a lot of them. Just an effort of time. We have a lot of presentations that include that information. We'd be happy to send it to you. But the one thing I want you to notice here is that blue on that water is so much higher. And if you pay attention to the images as we go through, that kind of definitely changed the dynamic of how we approached our end conceptual design. We had client and stakeholder meetings, quite a few conference calls with staff and stakeholders, and we did public involvement a little bit differently for this, and we'll go into this in a little bit. Instead of having kind of more sit-down formal meetings where everyone kind of gets in, their piece or their comment, we actually did very critical stakeholder interviews. We spent more than 3 days with hour and a half interviews with community leaders, residents, advocacy groups, the Rowing Foundation, getting into a lot of different stakeholders, a lot of different perspectives. Probably one of the best processes that I've ever experienced, and it was very, very helpful to understand what different groups of people had concerns about. And that hour and a half of one-on-one, it was myself and Jeff and whoever that was, it really helped shape the process. So if you see in something in particular, at the end design and the conceptual design, please let us know, because most of them were thought out based on feedback that we received from all of those stakeholder interview processes. Landing Park, what we're calling Landing Park, really goes from Castaway Bay all the way to the east side of the marsh, but you can kind of see it in the orange. It does exceed City of Sandusky city limits, which is why that map is up there. The reason, though, is because of all the land that Cedar Fair owns, as well as all the land that Erie Metro Parks owned, both of which paid significantly for the study as well, making sure that we were touching everyone's needs. So some of this does go above and beyond our city limits as we know it. This is just a close-up of the study area itself. All the green that you're seeing is Erie Metro Parks, kind of that turquoise color is Cedar Fair. You also can see it at Castaway Bay. There's a little bit of a jump of that private property. We have a lot of conservation areas as well as some city property as well, but most of the area that you're seeing up there is owned by either Cedar Fair or Metro Parks. So that being said, kind of going back to those stakeholder interviews, we had a really strong desire to have active space on this. Most of it is conservation land. So when you see the conceptual design, you'll see that comparatively there isn't really that much development, but it was very important to over 75% of the people that we worked with that there really needed to be something active versus passive. There was a very small group of people that thought that nothing at all should happen here. It was small enough where we're kind of not really mentioning it up here on the board, but the people that did feel that way felt pretty strongly about it, that it should just be, let it be as it is now, and just kind of let the Phragmites just kind of take it over. But in majority, about 75% wanted a very strong active use, and then the other 25% on the passive use, definitely more of trails, but maybe not some of the commercial that you're going to see being proposed on Cedar Fair property. Bicycle and pedestrians, those are the other things. You guys can read the slide. We specifically asked the question, should this be bikes only? Should this be pedestrian only? The one thing that I would throw out there from a funding standpoint, we have brought in quite a few grant dollars over the past 6 years for our clients, including City of Sandusky. It was very, very important to the stakeholders, to all of our interviewees, as well as staff and our clients, that it was bicycles and pedestrians. And the good thing about that is that actually helps us from a grant perspective. It's actually much more difficult to get money just for pedestrians or just for bicyclists. The feds, the state, people like the word multimodal, active transportation, that means all users. So having both of those user preferred was actually a very good thing because that's going to help us get money down the line. Programming elements, once again, this notion of this active use and kind of having a little bit more dense recreation there. Anything from children's play areas to trails and boardwalks, seating, birding towers. The Rowing Foundation would like a tower that duplicated as a place for all of their crew and captains to view everyone from up top as their crews are going by. Vendors, concessions, and a lot of rental. People really, from the stand-up paddle boards, kayaks, canoes, people really wanted that active where maybe you don't own one. They really wanted to be able to go to this site and utilize something, whether it was sold through the city, sold through a vendor, rented through the city, vendor, Cedar Fair. That was something that came up quite a bit. Main thing that I want to point out is even though we touch a lot of water we don't have a lot of waterfront views. When you actually get out there, Phragmites covers a lot of the surface edge as you're at the water. Typically, it gets 7, 8, 9 feet, especially with the high water level. It really sprouted up this year. You just get lost in it. So even though you look at an aerial map, when you saw in those drone images, you can't see through that stuff. So we had just a few areas that even today, we potentially have little peaks of the water, and we really wanted to celebrate that. The trail alignment itself, once again, this is kind of a piece of the Sandusky pathway update. We kick off the formal remaining city pathway update tomorrow. We have our first stakeholder meeting tomorrow morning and our public meeting tomorrow evening at Quaker Steak, if anyone wants to join us at 6 p.m. But this segment alone, we felt that was important enough with Cedar Fair and Erie Metro Parks kind of being major stakeholders here that we were going to pull this out and address this section of the trail by itself. So everything that you're seeing in bold are pieces that are in this phase 1 and phase 2 priority implementation that we want to start moving forward as fast as possible. And we've already started working with the staff on some grants that we can quickly line ourselves up for. You see a couple other sections that are a little bit faded out. Those are things that were explored but aren't being recommended as the phase 1, phase 2 options of the trail. I have up this map. We didn't include any blow-ups. Please let us know. We have lots of other presentations that go into the nitty-gritty of what all of these segments are. I can leave my card if anyone wants to get that detailed information. The other big thing that kind of threw us for a very interesting design loop, and I was very happy to hear Alex kind of bring up the nautical theme. We came in asking all of our stakeholders and clients, what do you want this to look like? So we put up images of kind of a natural, rustic versus whimsical versus contemporary. We gave everyone one dot. You only get one vote, pick one. And the overarching answer was, we want all of the above. So come up with something that combines all of these themes and make it work. So that was really interesting for us, and we're hoping that you like what you see. We had a lot of concepts, kind of this was always a working, Jeff doesn't stop doodling, constant opinions, constant, evolving of ideas, this notion that you're going to see that we're talking about of this Great Lakes coastal theme that we developed. Part of that helped guide the design process. You can kind of watch some of these graphics as we move forward, as they start become more sophisticated, pulling in all the different ideas from the stakeholder interviews and the client and staff. The seating areas, we didn't really want a formal children's play area, so we were kind of exploring this whole site that anything that's accessible by people is basically nature play for kids to play on instead of having that prescribed play environment. Lighting, kind of this whole rustic chic meets coastal Great Lakes, what is Sandusky, right? We have this Great Lakes coastal theme, and this is something that was a whole process in itself that took some evolution, but this is what we ended up with. As we move forward with the Sandusky Bay pathway update, the one thing that I really like and that I'm passionate about this theme is that we can have one thing at Landing Park and the way that this looks because we're so close to the water and we're so natural and so rustic. A lot of boardwalk that you're going to see because of our natural environments. But as we move into downtown and into the more residential areas, we have very rich history here. We're very industrial. Yes, we're coastal. We have mill history. This can evolve. This doesn't have to be so focused on the water coastal being kind of a little bit more, and the colorful play. And as we move into town, it can become other things. As long as we're cohesive and as long as we're, planning things right, it can evolve as you move through the different nuances of the city of Sandusky, which is why we love it here so much, and not be so prescribed. So we're very excited to kind of take that next step and understand what that's going to look like in a place like Shoreline Drive and how it can evolve from being at Landing Park and still feel like you're on the same trail going from downtown all the way out here. So these Great Lakes coastal materials, a lot of them are kind of some of the things that Alex talked about, but this is kind of more for Landing Park itself and dealing with the site that you saw in that base map. Understanding, as I mentioned, a lot of nature play. We didn't want there to be too many prescriptive play areas for children. Yes, there's seating for adults, but a lot of this is just kind of make with it as you see it and how you want to use it. and trying to understand the architecture. And this is definitely something that I think we have very little space that we can actually develop because of our natural areas. So our old runways are really the main areas that we can put these buildings, which are 100% owned by Cedar Fair. So this is something that we worked out with them as well. And they're very, very excited about it. So we're really hoping that it moves forward. So all of the black areas that you're seeing, including the north-south runway, which a lot of that concrete still exists. The east-west runway does not exist anymore, but it is upland. All of that black is upland, basically dry. Everything else that you're seeing on that map within the colored area, other than Sports Force that you see along Route 6 on the main, pink middle, is environmentally sensitive. Some of it's Category 2 wetlands, some of it's Category 3 wetlands, some of it's conservation area. So basically those black areas are the space that we can actually build physical buildings on without needing to go into extensive individual permits. Talking about those concepts as they evolved, trying to understand the intensity of this space was something that went back and forth a lot of, how many stories do we want this? How many buildings do we want to go? That north-south runway is only about 60 feet wide, but it's very, very long. So you could develop that entire stretch. And that's definitely something that we heard through our stakeholder interview process as well as our stakeholder meetings, that we need to be careful here. This isn't Disney. This isn't a repeat of Sports Force or Cedar Fair. We want to make sure that this is appropriate for the space as we have it. So kind of looking at the site plan here, what we're proposing, as you'll see in the graphics, are kind of in between the two intensities of uses that you're seeing on the screen. So this is kind of as we were wrapping up our concepts and really moving into what can fit, what's appropriate. We had a laundry list of different activities that people wanted here, and we knew that it wasn't appropriate to just squish everything into a space just because it could be there. We wanted to make sure that it all worked. Trying to understand, what this looks like as we move forward. And the big thing kind of kicking this off as we talk about not so much the trail design, but the site in general, is that this process was really led by the intent of making sure that residents were the focus. This is not, if it's good for residents, tourists will come. We will build our ecotourism, development and economic development. But the number one goal of this is to make sure that residents feel like this is their home, that this is inviting to them, and that this place is theirs. We've unfortunately heard that some of the development that has occurred further out on Route 6, that residents don't feel like it's theirs, and it's not really meant for them to go visit and to use, for better or for worse, and that everything around it really needs to be designed for that residential purpose. So part of that Great Lakes coastal theme is something that we were really trying to make sure that we weren't overplaying the design, still keeping it natural, and yet giving something that City of Sandusky residents really felt was home. This is pretty far away from most City of Sandusky residential subdivisions, areas, and our city core. So making sure that we're kind of creating that anchor node at the far east of the city as we transition into Erie Metro Parks and then Perkins and Huron, feeling like this is ours, right? So we added little maps to understand where all of these graphics are. The lake obviously helps us understand north-south orientation when you see that in the background. But basically the stars that you're seeing on the maps that you're going to see rotating throughout here is where we are physically in space, just to kind of keep track. So this is the bird's eye view of kind of what is Landing Park. The drive that you're seeing and the road and the trail, the pier extends off of the old north-south runway. A lot of concrete is still there, and we'd be able to use a decent amount of it. Some of it would have to be removed, but in general, we are maximizing that upland space that I talked about. The lighthouse, this is kind of our play. Instead of just having a wooden structure that's a birding viewing area, we played it up and kind of built in this Great Lakes coastal theme. The raised second story is ADA accessible. That is something that we went into great lengths to talk with quite a few people, including the folks at Adaptive Adventures for their kayaking program, basically trying to understand what that return on investment was to be able to allow wheelchairs to go all the way to the top of the potential lighthouse or birding tower versus just creating, some sort of view of the lake. And it was pretty much hands down agreed by those who would be impacted by this, that as long as we are given a space that we can get off the ground, see past the frag, see the lake, we're okay with that. So we have ramps going up to the elevated second story and then staircase leading up to that. The structure is definitely something that I would say is within reach. This is not something, we did not design to a budget. At the same time, we kept budget in mind as we went through this all the way through. You're going to see details of the Phragmites and everything else as we walk through in some of these images. So understanding, this is kind of off the main site, but we wanted to show Castaway Bay. This is something really quick that we're putting a bridge over the inlet that goes into where Quaker Steak actually is. The big reason that we wanted to show this tonight is that we are not adding on any land or changing any distance. The land that you're seeing that the bridge is touching down on is existing condition, and we're basically just putting a bridge on top of it. Those were some questions that we had after our Planning Commission meeting. So we're not adding any dirt into the water. We're keeping what's there and utilizing that. One of the big things that we're working with Cedar Fair on, as well as for the Phase 2 Sports Force development with CBRE, is a combined access drive, as well as ODOT for that matter. ODOT was a major stakeholder on this. We felt that it was very important just from a traffic standpoint and from an access standpoint that we combine the Landing Park access drive with the Stage 2 Sports Force drive to make sure that it was cohesive, park-like, welcoming, once again, making sure that residents felt like this was for them too, not just driving into a Sports Force parking lot. This is kind of something that we developed. This is a canopy walk. It's a boardwalk that basically is on stilts. The cool thing about this is that everything that you're seeing in all of these renderings, all of the trail is ADA accessible. So this is kind of another cool feature that for not that much extra money to elevate it, 100% ADA accessible, so it gives views of Cedar Point, gives views of Lake Erie, obviously, and actually gets you up into the treetops. So for someone that is in a wheelchair and is not able to maybe go to the top of the lighthouse, it does give you some really interesting kind of windy, curvy, and yet not too windy, curvy views of our environment, which is kind of cool. So that canopy walk leads through the Phragmites, and this is something that we worked with Erie Metro Parks quite a bit. The Phragmites is an invasive species. They do a lot of nutrient trading. I'm not an ecologist, but I do know that they are very, very good for Lake Erie. There's a lot of nutrient trading, so they do serve a somewhat good function when it comes to that. Other than that, they braid and take over everything, and they're pretty much impossible to get rid of. You can burn them, you can mash them, you can chemical burn them. They basically come back every 2 years, and you have to do it all over again and do it all over again. So the idea of just turning the entire coastline into a restored coastline to get rid of the frag was very, not to put word into Amy's mouth, but it was very overwhelming for Erie Metro Parks to think about having to control this situation. So we kind of took the approach on the west side. You can see that the lake is to the left here. So we're on the west side of the north-south runway. If you can't beat them, join them. So in this area, we're not promoting to cut down the frag, and instead we're basically weed whacking through it, putting in a boardwalk. Think about going through a corn maze. You basically would have frag on either side of you, and then it kind of outlets into a really nice seating area. It is boardwalk, but with some, seats built in to view the lake, etc. So the whole western side of the site, we aren't showing shoreline restoration or ecological restoration. We're leaving as is. The big thing on that is that it really does cut down on the operations and maintenance, and I think from our major stakeholders, Erie Metro Parks, it does, I think, ease their nerves a little bit. So moving into the lighthouse lookout, this is just a zoomed in version of what you saw before. If you have any questions about it, I'm happy to answer at the end. We are showing a fishing pier. There was talks, pretty extensive talks about the desire for a water taxi. Think of this as more of a covered pontoon boat. We understand the ecological sensitivity of the bay in this area. But getting to and from Cedar Point, getting to and from downtown, there is a station proposed potentially at Castaway Bay as well. So there are some areas that this would be feasible, and potentially it has not been worked out whether it would be city run, Cedar Fair run, but definitely some excitement behind it. Getting into that architecture that we talked about before, this is kind of where we start seeing, other than the boardwalk, kind of this Great Lakes coastal theme. Bars and restaurants were the big thing that kind of came up through our interview process. People wanted somewhere to go, and it's pretty natural to get on your bike, ride 5 or 6 miles and want to go have a beer and ice cream, but then also understanding from the rowers, from maybe, parents that are out at Sports Force, from Cedar Fair's perspective, everything between Cedar Point and Sports Force is very kid oriented. We go to see little kids' sports games because the kids are playing, not the adults. The adults really felt pretty much across the spectrum that they wanted a place that was a little bit more adult-like. And it's not that we're not inviting kids here, but we kind of see that use as being a little bit more adult-oriented. Once again, the intensity of it is not that significant. You're kind of seeing 2.5 stories. That's obviously up to, Cedar Fair of what they want to do with that. Utilities are going to be a challenge. Not that we can't get the utilities there, it's just the return on investment to get utilities there. So that's definitely something as we get into design that we're going to have to think about when we actually look at, we do need to extend a trunk sewer or some sort of line. Because of our conservation easements and because of our environmental sensitivity, we cannot have vault toilets on this site. So that's something that we have to think about, that we're trying to be realistic about and bring up now so that there aren't any surprises. But looking at this, we have an ADA accessible drop-off. That's something that was very important to Adaptive Adventures. They have one of the largest veteran ADA kayak program in the country. We wanted to make sure that, that was celebrated. So that's accommodated here, as well as a complete separation of the pathway versus the drive. In order to get vans, and kayak drop-offs up to the front, we want to make sure that they're not crossing paths with the bicyclists and pedestrians on the trail. And this is kind of just a close-up, once again, kind of thinking about architectural style. You can kind of see that separation. Seating areas, not quite prescribed, but not quite, not quite in your face either. This is just a back view of the same buildings you were looking at, the same four, just from a restaurant standpoint. The buildings themselves would have to be built on boardwalk structure, deck structure. What you're seeing from the front of these pieces are on dry land. By the time you get to the back, you can kind of see that we are running out of space there. So utilities would pull into the front, we deck off the back. And getting back into that, this outdoor dining, the notion of being able to bike and have a beer, being able to see the lighthouse. One thing that we like about that is that you're in such a big space. Having that vertical structure orients you, whether you're in the Frag Tunnel, whether you're on the East Bay, no matter where you are, you can kind of see that piece to understand where you are on that site, because it is an extensive site.
Ms. Johnson, I'm loath to interrupt, but we have a long agenda yet tonight, and this is all.
No, this is it.
Okay.
This is it.
Just didn't know where we were in the presentation.
So the big thing that the Metro Parks really wanted us to incorporate, and actually it sounds like we don't have a choice on incorporating, is that there is a hunting license and deed over the entire section of the East Bay. This is something that's controlled by ODNR, even though it sounds like it's managed by Metro Parks. There's kind of an overlap if you look at that. So we actually do have hunting platforms built into there. There's also seating included with them. Lots and lots of signs will be put up. It's out there now. It's something, I believe it's a 99-year lease, so this is something that's going to be around for a very long time. So we just wanted to make sure that the use of the bicyclists, the pedestrians, and this bird hunting season could all marry together. The big piece of this is pushing anyone to the north and making sure that it is a separated use. So this is something that was very strong for Erie Metro Parks that they felt very strongly about. So with that, are there any questions?
I should have been a little bit more patient.
No, it's okay, it's okay.
Commissioners, questions or comments?
Sure.
Mr. Brady.
Ms. Johnson, I've read somewhere, perhaps a newspaper article about the timing for completion of this project, and I believe it said 15 years. I guess my question to you is, what do you think we could do to accelerate that if this really takes shape? 15 years is so long to wait for something as important as this.
I think the big thing is that's kind of a 1 to 15 years, and we are working very, very hard with staff to make sure that there are constantly pieces and parts that are moving forward. Literally starting next month, we have a grant application that we are going to be going after for ODNR. The big thing sitting down is leveraging dollars. Almost every type of grant money out there requires some sort of match. So the big piece of that from a capital side is understanding what grants come when, and then making sure that we are able to budget from a capital standpoint what those grant dollars are when we need them as we expect them to come out. Federal dollars aren't even available until 2023 and 2024 when it comes to the ODOT side of things. So that means that we have to start doing things locally and from the state between now and 23 and 24, and then make sure that we are very, very strategic on what that phase is that we want, because ODOT is very excited about the section that goes along Route 6. We want to capitalize on that, but we can't get that money now. So that's part of why we see things so pushed out. I think making sure, though, that we have these out-of-the-gate solutions. ODNR money, if we're successful, is awarded the year that you get awarded. You don't have to wait 5 years.
Good, thank you.
Additional questions or comments, commissioners? Well, the ability to create a new waterfront park in Sandusky is something that I never anticipated we'd be dealing with, and it's a wonderful opportunity. I'm very excited also about the level of cooperation and collaboration that we have with local governments. A couple of us here, Mr. Poole, you were part of that when we were at odds with Cedar Point and especially with the county. We could not have imagined an opportunity to work collaboratively and create something that none of us could have created on our own. So that is really a great thing that we're able to see tonight. So thank you for your presentation, and we will look forward to working on this in the months and apparently some years to come. Okay, thank you. Commissioners, we have a lot of communications, mostly from Mr. Klein, so welcome to the Aaron Klein Show tonight. But I wonder if someone might care to make a motion to accept those communications.
So moved.
Second.
Been a motion, second discussion. Without objection, the motion be approved. And hearing no objection, the motion is approved. We do have one consent agenda item. I'm not sure that it makes much sense to have one consent agenda item. But unless someone wishes to remove that, would someone care to make the requisite motion? Oh, Mrs. Cresser, would you present that first, please?
Would you like me to just read it as a regular item and just do it normal?
Why don't we just do that? I think it'll be
Good
easier.
idea. First,
Thank you for it.
No.
Thank you for the idea.
I know who's in charge.
the first is a resolution approving and accepting certain real property for acquisition into the land reutilization program and declaring that this resolution shall take immediate effect in accordance with section 14 of the city charter.
Commissioners, having heard this communication, how do you wish to proceed?
Mr. Chairman,
Ms. Lloyd?
I move for the adoption of this resolution under the suspension of the rules and in full accordance with Section 14 of the City Charter.
Second.
Been a motion, second. Discussion? Mrs. Cresser, would you poll the commissioners on the motion, please?
Ms. Twine?
Yes.
Mr. Brady?
Yes.
Mr. Poole?
Yes.
Mr. Murray?
Yes.
Mr. Lockhart?
Yes.
Ms. Lloyd?
Yes.
Mr. Waddington?
And now on the resolution?
Ms. Twine?
Yes.
Mr. Brady?
Yes.
Mr. Poole?
Yes.
Mr. Murray?
Yes.
Mr. Lockhart?
Yes.
Ms. Lloyd?
Yes.
Mr. Waddington?
That resolution is adopted. Item number 1, please.
Item number 1 is a second reading for an ordinance approving a substantial amendment to the city's fiscal year 2017 one-year action plan for the Community Development Block Grant Program year of July 1, 2017 through June 30, 2018, and authorizing and directing the city manager to submit the amended action plan to the United States Department of Housing and Urban Development and declaring that this ordinance shall take immediate effect in accordance with section 14 of the city charter.
Commissioners, having heard this communication and bearing in mind that we did amend it at the last meeting to carve out $100,000 to remain in the revolving loan fund, what is your preference?
Mr. Chairman,
Mr. Brady?
move for the adoption of this ordinance at second reading.
Second.
Been a motion and second. Discussion.
Mr. Chairman,
Mr. Poole?
as with the first reading, I still find it inappropriate to use CDBG funds for this project. Even with additional information from planning, I see little improvement in the lives of low to medium, moderate income people's lives. We used a formula that said anyone within a 1 mile walking distance of Jackson Street Pier is what makes up the class of people that gives you the sufficient lower income to make this formula work. I suggest, I don't know very many people that are walking a mile to go look at Jackson Street Pier, so I'm having trouble trying to see how that improves their lives as is expected to the national objective. And again, this is simply my opinion. I observed that if you, adjacent to Jackson Street Pier, we have $150,000 to $300,000 condominiums along with a billionaire property owner next door. It's of Cedar Point. Likewise, throughout up and down that corridor, that this benefit does not seem to fit within what the, at least what I consider the spirit of what the law is, so my vote is going to remain no.
Additional questions or comments? Mrs. Cresser, would you poll the commissioners on the ordinance?
Ms. Twine?
Yes.
Mr. Brady?
Yes.
Mr. Poole?
No.
Mr. Murray?
Yes.
Mr. Lockhart?
No.
Ms. Lloyd?
Abstain.
Mr. Waddington?
Yes.
That passes on second reading. Item number 2, please, Mrs. Cresser.
Item 2 is an ordinance authorizing and directing the city manager to enter into an agreement with Osborne Engineering of Cleveland, Ohio for professional design services for the Shoreline Drive Rehabilitation Project and declaring that this ordinance shall take immediate effect in accordance with Section 14 of the city charter.
Commissioners, having heard this communication, how do you wish to proceed?
Mr. Chairman,
Mr. Waddington.
I move for the adoption of this ordinance under suspension of rules in full accordance with section 14 of the city charter.
Second.
It's been a motion and second. Discussion. Commissioners, I will abstain from a vote on this legislation as I have on matters related to Shoreline Drive in the past. Additional questions or comments?
Mr. Chairman,
Mr. Waddington.
I was on the commission, as Mr. Schwanger brought up earlier tonight in 2005, and this was Gary Pack, and at the time, we were looking at the salt piles and other things as far as construction traffic, so all that's true, and the climate's different downtown now. Since 05, we've got Chesapeake County, it's got a lot of people living downtown. Traffic's definitely increased, foot traffic and car traffic, so I'm looking forward to this finally getting done.
Mr. Chairman,
Spool.
I did have one more question. I think it could go for either. I thought of this later. Utilization of this, is this intended to be primarily a daytime operation? Because I don't recall us talking about lighting at all in this entire Shoreline Drive project.
Mr.
Am I
Klein,
wrong?
Mr. Klein, do you know an answer to that question, or do we need to bring Mr. Pesta back up?
Through Mr. President to Commissioner Poole, on a couple of the renderings, I did see some lights, some, I think the last one, there was some lighting in it. So that'll be something that we'll definitely be looking at throughout the project, is exactly what this needs to look like, what the cross-section, what the streetscape needs to look like. So the appropriate locations, I would assume, would have the lighting. One thing that I would say as well, a lot of those buildings will most likely have lighting on them too, on the north face of their walls, so there would also be lighting that would help for lighting up the roadway.
Thank you, Mr. Klein. Additional questions or comments? Mr. Cresser, would you poll the commissioners on the motion, please?
Ms. Twine?
Yes.
Mr. Brady?
Yes.
Mr. Poole?
Yes.
Mr. Murray?
Yes.
Mr.
Oh, excuse me,
Lockhart?
abstain. Sorry.
Okay. Mr. Lockhart?
Yes.
Ms. Lloyd?
Abstain.
Mr. Waddington?
Yes.
And now on the ordinance.
Ms. Twine?
Yes.
Mr. Brady?
Yes.
Mr. Poole?
Yes.
Mr. Murray?
Abstain.
Mr. Lockhart?
Yes.
Ms. Lloyd?
Abstain.
Mr. Waddington?
Yes.
That ordinance is adopted. Item number 3, please.
Item 3 is an ordinance authorizing and directing the city manager to enter into an agreement with Osborne Engineering of Cleveland, Ohio for professional design services for the Jackson Street Pier Rehabilitation Project and declaring that this ordinance shall take immediate effect in accordance with Section 14 of the city charter.
Commissioners, having heard this communication, how do you wish to proceed?
Mr. Chairman,
Mr. Brady.
move for the adoption of this ordinance under suspension of the rules in accordance with section 14 of the city charter.
Second.
Been a motion and second. Discussion. Mr. Klein, could you map out for us, or maybe Mr. Wobster, you have a better feel for this? One of the questions presented was whether the final design would come before the commission. my understanding of how this is, has to work with the design build is that once we engineer it, then we engineer it most of the way. I think maybe it's either 40 or 60%. And then we go out, instead of having a specific set of drawings, and we say, how much does it cost to build this? We do it in a more flexible approach. We say, okay, go out and you folks who are builders out there, you give us your ideas and you figure out the rest of the design and the rest of the engineering and then how to best to control those costs. And then we get, that's what a design build is. And so I would assume that we would have a series of votes, at least one more vote on the specific package. Could you address that?
Yeah, Mr. President, it was close. The way that it works is you do the RFQ, which Osborne was selected for that, and the drawings will be taken to 40% design. At that time, then we go out and we do an RFP and we request proposals from design build firms. Typically, some of these contractors will have engineers on staff and they can do it as the sole contractor, but for the most part, there's going to be a design engineer, their contractor, several subcontractors, and everybody on board in the room developing their proposal. We would then narrow it down to 3, similar to a normal RFP process, narrow it down to 3, and then we would select the top-rated firm to move on to the construction phase. So there would actually be coming in front of commission 3 times as opposed to 2 under the normal. We would be coming to go from the RFQ to the RFP, meaning that the 40% design phase, then we would be coming to develop a design contract with that design build team. Then we would be coming back a 3rd time to enter into an agreement for a construction contract. So there's 3 times as opposed to the normal, just doing the design, bidding it, and then constructing it.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Clark. Additional questions or comments, commissioners? Mrs. Cresser, would you poll the commissioners on the motion, please?
Ms. Twine?
Yes.
Mr. Brady?
Yes.
Mr. Poole?
Yes.
Mr. Murray?
Yes.
Mr. Lockhart?
Yes.
Ms. Lloyd?
Abstain.
Mr. Waddington?
Yes.
And now on the ordinance.
Ms. Twine?
Yes.
Mr. Brady?
Yes.
Mr. Poole?
Yes.
Mr. Murray?
Yes.
Mr. Lockhart?
Yes.
Ms. Lloyd?
Abstain.
Mr. Waddington?
Yes.
That ordinance is adopted. Item number 4, please.
Item 4 is an ordinance authorizing and directing the city manager to enter into an agreement for professional design services with DLZ Ohio Incorporated of Cleveland, Ohio for the West Side Utility and Connectivity Improvements Project, and declaring that this ordinance shall take immediate effect in accordance with Section 14 of the city charter.
Commissioners, having heard this communication, how do you wish to proceed?
Mr. Chairman,
Ms. Twine?
move for the adoption of this ordinance under the suspension of the rules in full accordance with Section 14 of the city charter.
Second.
Got a motion and second. Discussion. This is, Mr. Klein, this is a very large piece of work, and I know we've long anticipated having to do the water and the sewer work, but the part, I mean, that's important. We've got to get the basics right, as every city does. But the exciting part to me, in addition to taking care of what we need to take care of, is that this is a direct and really quick, frankly, outgrowth of the neighborhood planning process and the request that we do have connectivity so that the West Siders do have a safe and really a comfortable way to get into other parts of the city with the corridor or the walkway that's going to be put there. So, additional questions or comments? Ms. Cresser, would you poll the commissioners on the motion, please?
Ms. Twine?
Yes.
Mr. Brady?
Yes.
Mr. Poole?
Yes.
Mr. Murray?
Yes.
Mr. Lockhart?
Yes.
Ms. Lloyd?
Yes.
Mr. Waddington?
Yes.
And now on the ordinance?
Ms. Twine?
Yes.
Mr. Brady?
Yes.
Mr. Poole?
Yes.
Mr. Murray?
Yes.
Mr. Lockhart?
Yes.
Ms. Lloyd?
Yes.
Mr. Waddington?
Yes.
That ordinance is adopted. Item number 5, please.
Item 5 is an ordinance authorizing and directing the city manager to enter into an agreement for professional design services with Arcadius US Incorporated of Toledo, Ohio for the Cedar Point Water Main Improvement Project and declaring that this ordinance shall take immediate effect in accordance with Section 14 of the city charter.
Commissioners, having heard this communication, how do you wish to proceed?
Mr. Chairman,
Ms. Twine.
I move for the adoption of this ordinance under the suspension of the rules in full accordance with Section 14 of the city charter.
Second.
Been a motion and second. Discussion? Mrs. Cresser, would you poll the commissioners on the motion, please?
Ms. Twine?
Yes.
Mr. Brady?
Yes.
Mr. Poole?
Yes.
Mr. Murray?
Yes.
Mr. Lockhart?
Yes.
Ms. Lloyd?
Yes.
Mr. Waddington?
Yes.
And now on the ordinance?
Ms. Twine?
Yes.
Mr. Brady?
Yes.
Mr. Poole?
Yes.
Mr. Murray?
Yes.
Mr. Lockhart?
Yes.
Ms. Lloyd?
Yes.
Mr. Waddington?
Yes.
That ordinance is adopted. Item number 6, please.
Item 6 is an ordinance authorizing and directing the city manager to enter into an agreement for professional design services with Jones and Henry Engineers of Toledo, Ohio for the Pier Track Pump Station and Farwell Pump Station Improvements Project and declaring that this ordinance shall take immediate effect in accordance with Section 14 of the city charter.
Commissioners, having heard this communication, how do you wish to proceed?
Mr. Chairman,
Ms. Lloyd.
I move for the adoption of this ordinance under the suspension of the rules and in full accordance with Section 14 of the city charter.
Second.
Been a motion and second. Discussion? Mr. Klein, I don't mean to the commission doesn't want to give short shrift to all the work that you've done and your staff to get ready for all this, but this is another example of, really just getting some of our basic needs taken care of. 1950s era equipment and pumping stations that really need attention now before they become a problem, and I just appreciate the fact that you and your team are able to stay on top of these things, so.
Mr. Chairman.
Mr. Brady.
To supplement your comments, which I know Mr. Klein appreciates, I'd like to point out that tonight we're passing and voting on it passing about $1,700,000 in design services, some construction. That equates to, at some time in the future, almost $20 million of infrastructure improvements in this community. That is a massive undertaking for our engineering department, and I know that they are up to that task. They've proven that time and time again. I think that we are doing just exactly what our residents are asking for us to do, and that is to improve the infrastructure of this city.
Additional questions or comments? Mrs. Cresser, would you poll the commissioners on the motion, please?
Ms. Twine?
Yes.
Mr. Brady?
Yes.
Mr. Poole?
Yes.
Mr. Murray?
Yes.
Mr. Lockhart?
Yes.
Ms. Lloyd?
Yes.
Mr. Waddington?
Yes.
And now on the ordinance?
Ms. Twine?
Yes.
Mr. Brady?
Yes.
Mr. Poole?
Yes.
Mr. Murray?
Yes.
Mr. Lockhart?
Yes.
Ms. Lloyd?
Yes.
Mr. Waddington?
Yes.
That ordinance is adopted. Item number 7, please.
Item 7 is a resolution repealing Resolution 049-17R and declaring the necessity for the city of Sandusky, Ohio to proceed with the proposed West Market Street Sewer Replacement Project, approving the revised specifications and engineer's estimate of cost thereof, and directing the city manager to advertise for and receive bids in relation thereto, and declaring that this resolution shall take immediate effect in accordance with Section 14 of the city charter.
Commissioners, having heard this communication, how do you wish to proceed?
Mr. Chairman.
Mr. Waddington.
I move for the adoption of this resolution under suspension of the rules in full accordance with Section 14 of the city charter.
Second.
Been a motion and second. Discussion.
Chairman.
Mr. Brady.
I'd ask Mr. Klein to share with the rest of the commission and our residents watching at home an interesting story regarding this rebid. We are the victim of Mother Nature. Let Mr. Klein explain that.
Through you, Mr. President. This is a replacement project. We bid it out twice, and the second time we bid it out, the prices came in significantly higher than what we had anticipated. The reason for that is because of the hurricanes in the south. What happened was they had damaged several of the storage facilities for the pipe material, several of the refineries, and as oil is used in the plastic piping, it's something that the supply and demand is not in our favor right now for a lot of these underground projects, a lot of these sewer projects. So unfortunately, the bids came in too high, so we're back to the drawing board having to raise the price to do this work, and hopefully they can bring those prices down when we get to these larger projects next year.
Thank you, Mr. Klein. Additional questions or comments? Mrs. Cresser, would you poll the commissioners on the motion, please?
Ms. Twine?
Yes.
Mr. Brady?
Yes.
Mr. Poole?
Yes.
Mr. Murray?
Yes.
Mr. Lockhart?
Yes.
Ms. Lloyd?
Yes.
Mr. Waddington?
Yes.
And now on the resolution?
Ms. Twine?
Yes.
Mr. Brady?
Yes.
Mr. Poole?
Yes.
Mr. Murray?
Yes.
Mr. Lockhart?
Yes.
Ms. Lloyd?
Yes.
Mr. Waddington?
Yes.
That resolution is adopted. Item number 8, our last item, please.
Item 8 is a resolution authorizing the filing of a grant application with the Ohio Department of Transportation for financial assistance through the Highway Safety Improvement Program for safety-related improvements on Hayes Avenue and declaring that this resolution shall take immediate effect in accordance with Section 14 of the city charter.
Commissioners, having heard this communication, how do you wish to proceed?
Mr. Chairman,
Ms. Lloyd?
I move for the adoption of this resolution under the suspension of the rules and in full accordance with Section 14 of the city charter.
It's been a motion and second. Discussion. Mrs. Cresser, would you poll the commissioners on the motion, please?
Ms. Twine?
Yes.
Mr. Brady?
Yes.
Mr. Poole?
Yes.
Mr. Murray?
Yes.
Mr. Lockhart?
Yes.
Ms. Lloyd?
Yes.
Mr. Waddington?
Yes.
And now on the resolution?
Ms. Twine?
Yes.
Mr. Brady?
Yes.
Mr. Poole?
Yes.
Mr. Murray?
Yes.
Mr. Lockhart?
Yes.
Ms. Lloyd?
Yes.
Mr. Waddington?
Yes.
That resolution is adopted. And now, Mr. Wiltshire, we turn it over to you for your report.
Thank you, Commission President, Commission, audience, and staff. I will start with the donations. The first is a motion, or I'd ask for a motion to accept a donation of framing for proclamation, a $95 value on behalf of the ADA Advisory Board that was received from Jeff Berquist.
Second.
Been a motion and second. Discussion? Without objection, motion be approved. And hearing no objection, the motion is approved with our thanks to Mr. Berquist.
A donation of True Green fertilization for Facer Park at a value of $115.29 was received from Jeff and Laura Lee Crable, one of many in-kind donations that they've made to that space. I'd ask for a motion to accept that donation.
So moved.
Second.
Been a motion and second. Discussion? Without objection, the motion be approved. And hearing no objection, the motion is approved with our thanks to the Crables.
Thank you. Moving on to new and old business, starting with administration. We will be rolling out the wellness program again for 2018. The 2017 wellness program identified weight management, cholesterol, diabetes, nicotine use, and lack of primary care providers as the biggest concern. Therefore, in 2018, the wellness program will assist the city employees in these areas with targeted programs as well as continuing the baseline determination of the wellness of our employees. In the police department, officers from the agency were permitted to continue sporting their beards for the month of December. Officers were required to donate to a local charity in order to participate. A donation of $690 was presented to the organization OGO on December 1st. We thank the officers for that donation. Officers will also be teaming up with Chili's and other law enforcement and fire department personnel on December 18th from 5 p.m. to 8 p.m. to assist waitresses with serving patrons. Tips from the evening will be donated to St. Jude's Children's Hospital. Finally, a dueling bell ringing competition will take place on December 23rd from 10 a.m. until 2 p.m. Members of the police and fire departments will be ringing the red kettlebells for the Salvation Army at Kroger's to see who can raise the most money in their respective kettles. Moving on to the finance department. The final finance committee meeting of the year is Friday, December 15th, 2017 at 7:45 a.m. in the commission chambers. Again, that's Friday, December 15th at 7:45 a.m. in the commission chambers. Also, a general reminder for property owners of vacant dwellings. If your dwelling is expected to remain vacant and unoccupied during the winter months, we highly recommend that you contact our office to turn off the water. This will help prevent your water lines from freezing and breaking, which would lead to costly repairs for the property owners. The customer accounting office number is 419-627-5893. Again, that number is 419-627-5893. Also, a reminder that water and sewer rates will increase with the January 2018 bill. Information regarding the annual rate increases through 2021 are available on the city's website. Moving on to Public Works. The Division of Streets and Utilities currently performing the last round of leaf collection is scheduled for each zone, weather permitting. Use of new equipment has effectively improved efficiency and service this year. Residents who miss their scheduled pickup or who have additional leaves for disposal are reminded that there is a leaf drop-off area near the Marquette Drive entrance to the City Service Center 7 days a week until December 31st. Leaves must be placed in paper bags for drop-off. We will have to review dates on the fly if snow accumulates, so please be patient. With winter upon us, the Division of Streets and Utilities has been reviewing past snow plowing operations and is working aggressively to deal with snow issues. I will say I was out at the Santa Claus home at Washington Park on Saturday night and saw probably 2 or 3 snow plows go by, both on Columbus and in Washington. So I know they were out early for that snowstorm, and I've noticed the aggressiveness that they treated our first snowfall. Moving on to community development. On November 21st, 2017, the city received an appeal to City Commission from the Sandusky Library and the Follett House Museum in regard to the Landmarks Commission decision pertaining to the demolition of a building located at 417 Columbus Avenue. On November 15th, the Landmarks Commission rendered a tie vote on the matter. As such, the application was denied. The applicant has requested that appeal not be considered by City Commission within 30 days, but instead within the month of January 2018. Also for the CHIP program, I need a motion. Oh, I'm sorry, I needed a motion for that, I apologize
I'm sorry, I don't need clarity on the motion. The motion is to not hear it right away?
hear it in January,
Okay,
not
all
within
right.
the 30 day.
Been a motion, is there a second?
Second.
Been a motion and second. Discussion? All in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. Opposed? Motion carries.
Thank you. Also, news as to the CHIP program. For 2017, the Office of Community Development has been able to allocate $1.4 million of the Ohio Housing Trust funds to the Community Housing Impact and Preservation Program. The City of Sandusky has partnered with Erie County, the City of Huron, and the City of Vermillion to complete the application. The city's allocation is $250,000. Tim King, the senior planner with the Erie Regional Planning Commission, is the main contact for this program and will be able to answer any questions related to the application process. Mr. King can be contacted at 419-627-7524. Again, that's 419-627-7524. We're almost there. The regular Planning Commission meeting is scheduled for December 20th. It's been canceled. Also, the regular Board of Zoning Appeals meeting for Thursday, December 21st at 4:30 p.m. will be held in the first floor conference room. That's Thursday, December 21st at 4:30 p.m. for the Board of Zoning Appeals in the Commission chambers. Public services. The ice rink located at Whiteman Weber Park has been filled with water. We ask that residents be patient and wait until the rink is completely frozen before skating. Foxborough Park play equipment installation has been put on hold until the spring. The city greenhouse is growing some natural grasses known as Little Blue Stem and will be planting at Lions Park Shoreline to help with erosion control. The process has helped with other city parks and also helps with geese control. The plantings at Lions Park will take place this spring. Moving on to recreation. The city's recreation and planning departments have been encouraged to submit a full application for the fiscal year 2019 round of Coastal Management Assistant Grant Program funding. Full applications are due Friday, January 5th of 2018. The Paddle Sandusky project would plan, design, and implement public access for canoeing, kayaking, adaptive sailing, and stand-up paddleboarding at several locations along Sandusky's bayfront. The city submitted a $125,000 project pre-proposal in October, with half of the funds coming from city funds as well as public-private partnership funds with local businesses and clubs. The city was contacted on December 4th and encouraged to submit the full application. Awarded grants will be announced in late May 2018. Projects could begin as soon as July of 2018 and be completed within 12 to 18 months. Finally, the Recreation Department is accepting applications for the full-time position of Youth Program Supervisor. This position will be responsible for directing, planning, and coordinating youth programs and activities both through the city of Sandusky and with partners throughout the city. That concludes my remarks for this evening.
Thank you, Mr. Webster. Commissioners, questions or comments for Mr.
Mr. Chairman.
Grady?
Mr. Webster, there's been a opportunity that's been out there in front of us for a little while now. And I'm hopeful that this commission will see fit to give you the direction to post a job that we have talked about and that I believe is in the budget for this next year, and that is a housing coordinator for the neighborhoods. That is an idea that came to us through a specific person, Mark Norman, who has been a fervent community activist for quite some time and a advocate of improving our neighborhoods. Mark has doggedly spent time with most of us on this issue. And this is not just in response to one single resident's idea, but I think it is a response to collectively an idea whose time has come. And the opportunities that we have now to improve housing in our neighborhood and to add infill housing in our neighborhood is never going to get better or in more of a need than it is right now. So I'm optimistic that, I know that we have written a description for that job, and I'm optimistic that you will take this as an opportunity to post that job, and let's move forward with this idea, and let's aggressively move forward and find the right person to lead this.
Comments, Mr. Webster?
Through the commission president to Commission Vice President Brady, we agree that this is a position that would serve the city well. I think Director Lasko, overseeing our housing initiatives to date, has done an amazing job of scaling up programs ranging from down payment assistance to exterior grant repair to partnering on the administration of the county land bank. But as we look at even bigger and better opportunities made possible by a strengthened housing market, as well as the outreach work being done by folks like Talent Floor in the neighborhoods, we see a real opportunity to take that to scale. Examples of things that could potentially be coming up this year include the creation of a residential tax abatement program for all rehabbed and new construction housing. The administration of that program will certainly be tedious and take time. We look to bring things like the Cold Creek development back to market through partnering with the housing development there. We're very seriously looking at ways that we can bring assistance through rehabbed housing or new construction housing in the south side neighborhood surrounding Churchwell Park. Those are just a few examples, and have had also very promising conversations with the Home Builders Association about how to stimulate infill housing on lots throughout the city. That is all in addition to the significant work that's been taking place on housing and economic development and code enforcement and land bank. And so we do believe that to encourage home ownership, to stimulate continued rehabs and new construction housing throughout the city, that this would be a position that is well-timed and well-received. And we're looking to bring that position to the commission in this year's budget, but would certainly be willing to get that process started sooner so that we could get someone in place soon, should the commission so support that direction.
Thank you.
Well, it is something we've talked about for a long time, and, you know, I do sense that in major parts of the administration, we're running out of bandwidth. Engineering is working like crazy. I know Matt and Angie are working like crazy, as is Brad. Just a lot going on right now, and I think that as long as the dollars are available in the budget, there's really no place more important to spend it than making sure that the neighborhoods, which at the end of the day are what make up the city, receive the support that they need. So I'd like to see us move forward with that. Additional comments on that subject? Other items?
Is it a motion?
Yes, for comment.
Yeah, I don't think it's a motion.
I didn't know if you made a motion.
I don't think it was a motion. Additional questions or comments for the city manager?
Mr. Chairman, just at the point in time we decide to make this official, I'd like to have a presentation that indicates what it actually is going to do. I mean, he's given us some ideas of what it could be. Nice to know what the measurements are, what our expectations are to actually be accomplished by this job. What it's going to pay, what else, what support do we have for the job? Secretarial, what are the add-ons that we're going to have after the person comes?
Mr. Webster, I assume that'll be part of the budget presentation.
We can send that. It'll be part of the budget presentation, and we'll send that to the commission before we would post the position as well.
Okay, all right, thank you. Additional questions or comments for the city manager? If not, then any items of old business? Any items of new business?
Mr. Chairman,
Mr. Brady?
I must make a motion for an executive session regarding litigation,
It's pending litigation.
pending litigation.
Second.
Been a motion and second. Discussion? Ms. Cresser, would you poll the commissioners?
Ms. Twine?
Yes.
Mr. Brady?
Yes.
Mr. Poole?
Yes.
Mr. Murray?
Yes.
Mr. Lockhart?
Yes.
Ms. Lloyd?
Yes.
Mr. Waddington?
Yes.
That executive session is set. Any other items of new business? Then we turn to audience participation. Anyone wishing to address the commission on any matter relevant to the city, please step to the microphone. Bear in mind that we need your name and address, and please limit your remarks to 5 minutes.
Okay, my name is Melvin Smith. I live at 4707 Venice Road. Why can't they make Stone Street a one-way? Off of Tyler to Moreau.
I don't know the answer to your question, sir. That's a good question for either Mr. Klein or the police chief. Perhaps they could share some comments with you. I don't know what considerations might be relevant to the question you're asking.
Because I know when I lived on Stone Street, it was like parking on this side, but then you had to pull into somebody's driveway so another car can come through. Because my car's got hit twice. I was wondering if they can make that like a one-way.
Mr. Harris, what is the process by which we initiate that kind of a discussion? Because it affects obviously a lot of people on the same block. Is that purely administrative and commission function, or can you shed some light on that? Is that a petition process, or what is that?
I do know it would require a petition process with the various neighbors having some input and public input as to what can be done. It's not a state route, so ODOT wouldn't be involved. There would be some coordination with police and public works, but it's something that we can visit.
Okay. What would be the best way to proceed, do you suppose?
I could take his name and number, and then we'll follow up with him.
Okay, so Mr. Harris is our law director, and he'll follow up with you, and we'll make sure that we understand fully what the process is that is required, because this impacts not just you, but the neighbors, so they also had to have a voice in all this too. So, if you just make sure that Mr. Klein, or Mr. Whoopser gets Mr. Harris gets your contact information, or all three of them would be fine too.
Okay.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you, sir.
Hi, my name is Susan Zier. I live at 414 Snow Court. My sidekick here is Kia. She's a service dog in training and will be a wheelchair assist dog this April. The reason I'm here today is not because of any city issues. I'd like to extend a thank you to Mr. Dennis Murray. On that day that we were picking up trash at the underpasses, I asked you for a contact information for an aide to Sherrod Brown. I thought about sending you a card saying thank you, but that didn't seem to express the magnitude of what that simple gesture did for me. So I'd like to tell my story. And you'll have to excuse me because it's hard for me to stay composed when I talk about this. My son-in-law, Heath, who is an active duty Ohio Army National Guard medic, currently undeployable due to having been diagnosed last March with an extremely rare lung cancer, as well as a rare mucous membrane autoimmune disease. Heath served in Iraq for 1 year starting in October 2006, working in a medical clinic on Camp Liberty. He also spent time on Camp Victory and Joint Base Balad. He previously served a deployment to Kosovo and at this time has been serving his country in a military capacity for 14 years. On March 21st, 2017, his oncologist broke horrible news to us. His doctor's first words were, "What the hell have you been exposed to?" This type of cancer is only caused by toxic chemical exposure. The prognosis wasn't good, giving him 2 to 12 months to live. He's currently still with us. After consulting with 20 oncologists, none could recommend a positive course of treatment. At age 35, he was advised to get his affairs and paperwork in order and prepare for the end of his life. Shortly thereafter, we learned the cancer had metastasized to his mucous membranes, his bones, pericardium, and his entire thoracic system. From the autoimmune disease, he bleeds from his nose and ears daily and suffers headaches and other pain. The cancer in his membranes is deteriorating his septums, so along with the blood, tissue is expelled from his nostrils daily. He struggles to breathe and sleeps about 60% of what would be normal waking hours. This soldier should be looking forward to taking his beautiful daughter to her first day of kindergarten next fall instead of planning his own funeral. A few days after March 21st, someone, not a military official who should have had been giving us this information, sent my daughter an article about burn pits in Iraq, where tons of toxic waste were burned daily, in violation of EPA and Department of Defense regulations. Heath was in close proximity to burn pits during his tour. Our horror worsened to learn that the Department of Defense knew in October of '06, the same month Heath was deployed there, after Air Force bioenvironmental engineer Lieutenant Colonel Darren Curtis submitted a report of tests he ordered where the assessment team deemed the burn pit area he tested was the worst environmental disaster he'd ever been associated with, and that there was a danger for acute and serious chronic health hazards. The Army immediately classified the report using the toxic burn pits. They classified the report and continued using the toxic burn pits, then did their own illegitimate testing 2 years later, showing there was no danger. In fact, the Department of Defense and BA stance to this day is that exposure to the burn pits only caused temporary irritation and that there's no evidence of any long-term health issues. I would love for someone from the Pentagon to tell my family this straight to our face. You can imagine our horror to learn that defense contractor Halliburton's subsidiary, Kellogg Brown & Root, was contracted to build incinerators, which they neglected to do, and the Department of Defense turned a blind eye. The contract also included an indemnification clause, whereas any lawsuit compensation awarded or fines assessed will be reimbursed by our government. A class action lawsuit versus KBR was dismissed last July on grounds that the BA is already compensating the afflicted veterans, which isn't true. Imagine our horror to learn that the British bases hired Iraqi contractors to build and run incinerators, and they don't have over 110,000 poisoned and sick veterans today. 2,100 of those veterans reside in Ohio. Imagine our horror that our 35-year-old loved one is dying as a result of serving his country, and his country won't acknowledge that. Imagine our horror when down the road and the Middle East War Memorial is built. My granddaughter's daddy will not be included, even though he will indeed be a casualty of the Iraq War. He won't even be awarded a Purple Heart. He will not be acknowledged as dying for his country. Imagine our horror knowing the military could have and should have taken measures to keep him safe, but instead continued to poison him after being advised by the lieutenant colonel in the Air Force that soldiers' lives were in imminent danger due to the toxic emissions from open-air burn pits. So what you did by giving me Ann Longworth's email is I was able to convince her with some persistence to attend a showing of a documentary about the burn pits that I hosted at the Sandusky Cinemark Theater. Anne was hesitant to come because she felt there's been some legislation passed concerning this burn pit situation, but I was able to convince her. And she was horrified. She came to the movie, she was horrified, and thanked me for urging her to attend. She has since put me in contact with several other aides of Sherrod's, Senator Brown's, and I was invited to a Veterans Affairs field hearing a couple weeks ago with Senator Brown, and I've also been put in contact with the Senate Veterans Affairs Committee's lead counsel, who is, I've been sending more information to. So what we want is a hearing before the Senate Veterans Affairs Committees where burn pit victims can tell their stories. So by you giving me that address, you've moved mountains for me, and with the help of Ann, and it's really important right now because the current stance the VA and the Department of Defense has is that no one was poisoned in Iraq, and there's no long-term health effects from any of the toxins that the burn pits could have emitted. So this hearing is important.
From what I have read, you and others who have been similarly impacted have really shone a light on what is a modern Agent Orange. It took a long time for that to be recognized and for those soldiers to have their sacrifices recognized. I can only say thank you to you for your advocacy, and I'm very sorry that you and your family are dealing with this tragedy. But good luck to you. You're in the hands of good people with Ann and Sherrod Brown, and they will continue to pursue that. So thank you for coming here tonight.
Thank you. And I have some letters to Sherrod Brown and Mercy Chapter that are,
Thank you. But the letters you could give to Mrs. Cresser, and she would send them out to all of us so we can see, okay?
And it's well, you can read them. It's encouraging Senator Brown to host a hearing with the Veterans Affairs Committee, and there's already been one proposed to the House Veterans Affairs Committee, and it's encouraging Mercy Chapter to support that.
Okay, so Mrs. Cresser will make sure we see all of those.
All right, thank you.
Thank you, ma'am.
This one, I have about 6 or 7 of them. Do you want me to just give you one and you can make copies? I think that one's for Senator Brown, and this one's for Mercy. Okay, thank you so much.
My name is Aberdare Dancel. I live at 2042 Rhoda Street.
2740.
I received a letter from the tree commission. They told me how good the trees look and what our assets were to the city. But the cleanup behind it is not access. They're not doing the cleanup. I'm doing the cleanup. And all I wanted them to do is cut off all of the small limbs and leave the big limb, so I wouldn't get all those little sticks falling off, and them acorns or whatever that fall off of the tree. I have to rake them up or either pick up the sticks, because if I don't, every time I mow the lawn, I got to take the blades off and get it sharpened. You know, and I just can't understand. You can dig up trees and plant trees, but you can't trim one tree. That's all I have to say. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. I think that at the last meeting, we had established that the tree had been trimmed twice, so I understand you disagree whether it was sufficient.
Catherine Carter, 5309 Columbus Avenue. There was a discussion the last time when we were talking about his tree. He said it was an oak and someone else said it was a maple. If it's a pin oak tree, that will constantly drop branches. He can't get rid of it unless he gets rid of the tree. Just saying. All right. Back to the pier. Shoreline Drive, okay. Mr. Pesta was showing us the design he had for Shoreline Drive, and I'm questioning why is the Jackson Street, the first block of Jackson Street, narrowed up so much? Because the delivery trucks come down there, you're not going to get those 40-some foot long beer trucks down there. I've watched them pull around there and then get out and ask other delivery drivers to move their vehicles so they can get their trucks all the way on to Shoreline Drive. And it just seems unnecessary to narrow that one block there. And the change on Wayne Street, the first block of Wayne Street, I'm not understanding why that has to be changed either. I don't see a problem in those two areas. I agree with Mr. Poole about the chains. It looks nice, but suddenly you're feeling blocked in. The areas they were discussing behind the apartments, if the snowplow can get back there when the people are backing out, if they're backing out into traffic. Huron just went through, I don't know if any of you leave the city, but Huron just went through a major overhaul of their main street down to the pier. And they zigzagged their curbs in and out. Here's one parking space, there's 3 parking spaces, there's 1, there's 2. I watched people having a heck of a time trying to back out of those parking spaces, the parallel parking, because they get backing into the curbs. Every week you drive down there and there's more marks on the curbs, more marks on the curbs. Finally, they got smart. They took it all out, and I'm sure that cost them a lot of money to put it in. It was a lot of concrete, and it took a lot of money to take it all out, and they repaved it, and the same parking spaces are there, but they're just designated with painted lines. Easier to get in and out of. The street looks beautiful now. It's not all zigzagged in and out. It looks very nice. Suggestion would be behind the apartments, paint it out first and see how that works. Because people do drive. It's a wide street. People drive. If it's painted out that is their parking space, then that would be easier to plow for the city or for whoever's going to take care of it. And it's cheaper than putting some barriers there and find out that doesn't work either, because now you got to work in and out of. When I saw what happened in Huron, I thought whoever decided that should be happening with that zigzag concrete should have to drive a snowplow 7 days of every winter. At least one of them has to be an ice storm or a blizzard, because it was ridiculous. And now that looks beautiful. The street looks really nice. He was talking about putting the landscaping and the trees and stuff. Again, my concern, and like we said at the last meeting, Mr. Pesta acknowledged it, that everyone said, save the views from the lake, or to the lake, save the views to the lake. I don't know if his plan has, it looks to me like there's trees behind Shade Mylander. That doesn't save the view from the lake. When you're coming down Columbus Avenue, you're looking at the lake. You're looking at the Jet Express coming in. You're looking at ferries. It draws you to the lake. And I hope that they don't put any trees at the ends of any of these streets, because that's drawing you in. You can see it as you're coming down from where Tracerelli's used to be. You can see you're heading for the water. Now, if you're designating the pier as something worse than what we were talking about, it's a slum area now, doesn't that lower Miss Lloyd's property values because she's across the street from a slum and a blighted area? Doesn't that tell Chesapeake Lofts that their property values just dropped $30,000? Because if it's going to take 2 years to do this, if I lived over at Chesapeake Loft, I'd be running down to the tax office tomorrow and seeing if I can get my taxes changed for 2 years. What the heck? It's worth the effort. Something that never gets brought, well, it keeps getting brought up every time you talk about the pier, but we haven't heard the city say anything about it. The newspaper said officials would offset any loss of parking from added green space and other amenities on the pier by creating a nearby long-term parking lot for tourists. Where is this nearby long-term parking lot going to be created? And that's not the parking garage. That's not nearby. So where is the city planning on creating this long-term parking lot? Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Carter.
Mr. Chairman?
Mr. Poole.
I want to comment, as we can see that most folks are pretty much in favor of improving our waterfront. But we are really trying to avoid the kind of design flaws that we saw that Huron just experienced. And I just want to bring this up for one last moment. I recognize now, I saw it as we thought of it after the presentation. You had a 5-foot bike lane on the north side. A 5-foot bike lane is a single lane. It's not space for two-way traffic. And just moving forward, just recognize that, as I said, mixing pedestrian traffic with bicycles, I think is a bad idea in of itself. But with a 15-foot walkway, 10 of which, or 8 of which, plus whatever, and then just 5 for the bike lane, and maybe I'm wrong with some, if I think that's what I saw in your drawing. If not, you can correct me. But a 5-foot bike lane is nowhere near sufficient for two-way traffic for bicycles, especially next to pedestrians. And maybe I misinterpreted it, so you can correct me if I'm wrong.
Something that will get worked out in the design phase.
Great, thank you.
Anyone else?
Tim Schwanger, 362 Sheffield Way. Is there a plan in place for when we take down trees? The city pays for taking down trees in the city parks and in the right-of-ways to get rid of the stump. What I'm referring to is, a few months ago, there were, I think, 4 trees taken down in the Huron Park where the kids play along the boulevard for Huron Ave. And the stumps are still there, so I didn't know if we take the trees down first and then we have a contractor come in, maybe we don't have the equipment, but what is the process to have the stumps actually taken out?
Mr. Link, I don't know to use, sometimes I know homeowners or other property owners will use chemicals to accelerate the deterioration of them. I don't know if we do that or what we do.
No, through you, Mr. President, to Mr. Schwanger, we have a stump grinder that we do in-house. We have a backlog of stumps from years and years of stumps that we are trying to get to. We know about our parks in particular, especially around players that we try to get to, but we also try to get to the residences. One of our commissioners also said we don't want them back there when the snow melts this spring, so we're doing our best to get as many done as we can before the spring.
Okay, so there is no really plan in place that when you take a tree down that you immediately remove the stump?
We do not have the manpower to do that.
Okay. All right, thank you.
Mr. Chairman?
Cool.
I recommended this before, I'm gonna recommend it again. There are small businessmen around here that are capable of cutting these stumps. I see no reason why we're dragging the stump removal out over years and years when, as he's indicated, he doesn't have the manpower to keep up. Just grinding the stumps should not be that expensive. We've got money to spend, I think, and I suggested it 3 months ago that we do, or a couple of months ago that we do that. Hopefully give some consideration to it.
Well, it would seem as though it makes sense to think about, including whenever we have the next tree removal contract, that we might designate some dollars for stump removal. Just a thought. It's something worth considering. I think that's right. Okay. Anyone else wishing to address the commission? I'm sorry, Mr. Link.
Through our contract, the contractor grinds the stumps and puts the dirt in the grass seed. So this would be something that I would look at separately from that.
Yes, this is catch up from years. Frankly, we had years of neglect, and we're still catching up with it. I know we had that terrible storm a year and a half ago now. It took down an awful lot of trees, and we had to get those out of here in a hurry and have the chance to get to all those stumps. We've been getting to some of them, I've noticed, especially as we get sidewalks done, but yeah, that would be something above and beyond. All right, thank you. All right, then we will take a very brief, 3-minute recess. Then if you don't get back in here for the executive session, you're getting locked out.